Hi everyone, I'm going to be reading chapter 9 of the Hatchet. Brian found it was a long way from sparks to fire. Clearly there had to be something for the sparks to ignite, some kind of tinder or kindling, but what? He brought some dried grass in, tapped sparks into it and watched them die. He tried small twigs, breaking them into little pieces, but that was worse than the grass. Then he tried a combination of the two, grass and twigs. Nothing. He had no trouble getting sparks, but the tiny pieces of hot stone or metal, he couldn't tell which they were, just sputtered and died. He settled back on his haunches in exasperation, looking at the pitiful clump of grass and twigs. He needed something finer, something soft and fine and fluffy to catch the bits of fire. Shredded paper would be nice, but he had no paper. So close, he said, so close. He put a hatchet back in his belt and went out of the shelter, limping on his sore leg. There had to be something. There had to be. Man had made fire. There had been fire for thousands of years, millions of years. There had to be a way. He dug in his pockets and found the $20 bill in his wallet. Paper, worthless paper out here, but if he could get a fire going with it, he thought. He ripped the 20 into tiny pieces, made a pile of pieces, and hit sparks to them. Nothing happened. They just wouldn't take the sparks. But there had to be a way, some way to do it. Not 20 feet to his right, leaning out over the water, were birches, and he stood looking at them for a minute, and then he registered. There was beautiful white bark-like paper on the outside of it, speckled so beautifully. Paper. He moved the trees where the bark was peeling from the trunks and lifted it in tiny tendrils, almost fluffs. Brian plucked some loose, rolled them in his fingers. They seemed dry and flammable. He pulled and twisted bits off the trees, packing them in one hand while he picked them with the other, picking and gathering until he had a wad the size of a baseball. Then he went back into the shelter and arranged the ball of birch bark peelings at the base of the black rock. As an afterthought, he threw in the remains of the $20 bill. He struck, and a stream of sparks fell onto the bark and quickly died. But this time one spark fell, one small hair of dry bark, almost a thread of bark, and it seemed to glow a bit brighter before it died. The material had to be finer. There had to be a very soft, incredibly fine nest for the sparks. I must make a home for the sparks, he thought. A perfect home or they won't stay. They won't make a fire. He started ripping the bark using his fingernails at first, and when that didn't work, he used the sharp edge of the hatchet, cutting the bark in thin sliver hairs so fine they were almost not there. It was painstaking work, slow work, and he stayed with it for over 2 hours. Twice he stopped for a handful of berries and once to go to the lake for a drink. Then back to work, the sun on his back, until at last he had a ball full of fluff as big as a grapefruit, dry birch bark fluff. He positioned his spark nest, as he thought of it, at the base of the rock, used his thumb to make a small depression in the middle, and slammed the back of the hatchet down across the black rock. A cloud of sparks rained down, most of them missing the nest, but some, perhaps 30 or so, hit in the depression, and of those 6 or 7 found fuel and grew. They began to smolder and caused the bark to take a red glow. Then they went out. Close! He was so close! He repositioned the nest, made a new and smaller dent with his thumb, and struck again. More sparks, a slight glow, then nothing. It's me, he thought. I'm doing something wrong. I do not know this. A cave dweller would have had a fire by now. A Cro-Magnon man would have had a fire by now. But I don't know this. I don't know how to make a fire. Maybe not enough sparks. He settled the nest in place once more and hit the rocks with a series of blows as fast as he could. The sparks poured like a golden waterfall. At first they seemed to take off. There were many sparks, and they all died. They were starved. Starved of what? He leaned back. They are like me. They are starving. It wasn't quantity. There were plenty of sparks, but they needed more. And that's chapter 9, part 1. I'm going to stop there. And before you listen to chapter 9, part 2, what do they need more of? What were the sparks starved of?